Welcome to my desktop, everybody. I've cleared it off because we've got something quite special that came into the mail today. Let me just go ahead and take care of this. All right, we have gotten our Steam controller. Um, I'm just really excited, so I thought I'd share this. Uh, I don't really think I'm going to be doing a lot of unboxing content. I guess the 3D printer one counts as an unboxing video as well, since I literally filmed myself putting that thing together out of the box. Um, but this is really interesting. This crosses over less so from like the 3D printing and maker side of things, but over to the more general text, but specifically gaming side of things. Um, I've really enjoyed using Valve's hardware offerings um, for like different things. I have the original Steam controller with some B-roll of that guy. I have used the Steam Knuckles controllers with the HTC Vive. I never had the money to upgrade up to the like the Valve Index or anything like that. And I also have a Steam Deck, which is kind of interesting. I will probably make another video about this. I have a Steam Deck and I actually use it as a little home lab server instead of using it for gaming. So it actually sits on my wall and it runs like local smart home assistant stuff and like some servers and stuff for me to play games with friends and whatnot. Um, but I'm excited because I beat the scalpers to getting the Steam controller. I kind of slept in a little bit the day that the Steam controller went out. It came out technically 10 a.m. Pacific time. So yeah, like I guess I was one of the lucky few that beat out the scalpers or just beat out the sort of just crazy demand for this controller. Um, this is the box that it obviously comes in. There was another box around it, but that has like my address and stuff. So I'm not going to put that one on screen. But quite literally, I didn't pre-unbox this and then put it back in. This is completely fresh. I really hope there's none of my personal identifying information on any of these stickers, like another like address box or anything like that. I'll double check that in the footage. But this is literally going to be me getting my hands on this for the very first time. And I guess if we're going to be doing an unboxing style video, let's go over the box. We're going to go over it step by step. Maybe I will talk a little bit about the specs and why I'm so excited to be using something like the Steam controller. Right. So here's like the top of the box. This is, it's like a nice box. I'm not going to comment too much on a cardboard box. Interestingly enough, I guess they wrote a statement that wraps around the back or around the sides of the box. Your games at your fingertips, right? And Steam controller here. Um, this is, I'm guessing in French. Sorry, I took Spanish class in high school. Vos jeux au bout de dois. I have no idea if I said that correctly. I apologize to the entirety of France.
Vos jeux au bout des doigts.
Your games at your fingertips.
So there's some warnings here. This looks like some generic paperwork. Overall, though, it's like pretty like cool iconography and stuff. I don't know. I think the way that Valve does their styling for their packaging and stuff like that has always been like a sort of nerdy sleek. I was gonna say chic and sleek, so sleek, right? A sort of chicness and a sort of nerdiness that, like, I don't know, I just find appealing. This looks like you have a QR code which takes you to a Steam controller webpage, which probably just tells you like how to use it and just has a manual. There's probably a paper manual. So let's actually crack this guy open. Yeah, I'm not gonna spend too much time talking about a box. I'll probably cut that part down. All right, so we have to peel this cardboard little tab here. Nice, that's a clean peel. And then it should just open up. So let's just open this up right here. It's in white packaging here, right? And you can see the actual product itself, right? And then on the top here seems some icons for the charging puck and things like that. And some little paperwork there. But the charging puck's right here. So this might be the cable for the puck, right? There actually is like a tiny bit of dust. Oh no, review ruined. No, that's just how it came. It's a piece of cardboard. It's actually like kind of a box I'm probably going to keep around. I mean, I guess if I ever had to return the device, it would help to keep it in its initial packaging. But yeah, they seem to have put a lot of care and attention in the unboxing experience. I think for the Steam Deck, I wasn't filming or like making YouTube videos around the time the Steam Deck came out. Um, yeah, they had put like some like fun sort of making the unboxing like a legitimate part of the experience. I think like Apple devices, they do that pretty commonly for, right? So let's go ahead and take the device out. and just take all the pieces out. I guess also for myself to make sure I don't forget anything in the box, right? So here's the controller itself. There's probably lots of videos that kind of go over what the controller is and what it looks like. Let's go over all the pieces that are in the box, right? You got that here. This looks like the charging and wireless puck that basically acts as a wireless dongle. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get focus in on that right there. And then in this top half of the box must be where the charging cable lies. I have no idea how they want me to take this out. I'm guessing this part just all pops out. There's a little fold right there, and you get your USB-A to USB-C cable, which lets you plug the puck into your computer, right? Um, and then in here seems to be the warranty and safety, like handling information in various languages, right? Yeah, health, safety, maintenance, and all the regulatory information that they have to keep there, probably for legal reasons, right? There's also another slip of paper here. This probably also isn't extremely riveting stuff, right? They're showing you that they're cleared by the sort of governing bodies of a bunch of places across the world. It also tells you a little bit of here about the sort of voltage required, probably from the specs of the cable or from the for the charging puck, 5 volts at 1 amp. So this thing actually doesn't charge particularly fast. Um, but from what I've heard from the specs, it has a decent battery life. So the fact that you're also being able to just dock the controller on the puck, like via this like pogo pin setup here and the magnets built in, means that like if you just park this thing on the puck overnight, it doesn't really matter if it's fast or slow. If it's sitting there overnight, it's going to be topped up by the time you take it back out, right? This is wrapped up just with a little sheet of paper. Some people care about the experience of unboxing and makes the device feel premium. Some people it's just about making sure the device works well and does its job, right? You know, my experiences with Valve's hardware, with the Knuckles controller, with the Steam Deck, I've been really happy with their hardware offerings. Um, and I guess I could dive into why I was excited for this controller, since I think a lot of people have pretty decent like first party and third party controllers for the PC gaming ecosystem, as well as if they game on like console platforms. As to like what makes this special, right? And so I mean, for those who already are interested in things like the Steam Deck, I feel like this overlaps that sort of circle or Venn diagram of interest is you want a controller that kind of has the sort of robustness of first party support for the PC platform, and that's something that, in general, you kind of sort of halfway get with PC gaming, right? If you were to have, like, an Xbox, you would be using the first party Xbox controller. It's a great controller. I grew up with Xbox. That was the console of choice I had when I was a kid. I had the Xbox 360. I stopped before the Xbox One came out, and that's when I decided to build a gaming PC instead. But, you know, like, the Xbox controller is super great, and for those who grew up in the world of PlayStation, the PlayStation controller, the DualShock controllers were great, and the DualSense controller is really good, and a lot of people really like that. But PC, your kind of go-to is mouse and keyboard, and there is not really a first-party default stand-in. I mean, I guess there's lots of manufacturers that make like Logitech makes great keyboards and mice, etc., etc. But there's like this it's a very PC cultured type thing where the beauty of PC versus console is that sort of open-ended ecosystem where you have a lot of choice. Like you can see my keyboard right here, right? Very weird split, like ortholinear keyboard. It's actually made out of Lego compatible bricks. I don't think you're allowed to say that this is a Lego keyboard because it's not an official Lego product, right? And I guess to give you some context, as to if I wanted to play a game with a controller as opposed to mouse and keyboard, here's what I've been using as my sort of premium primary controller. This is the GameSir Cyclone Pro 2 is the name, and it's fantastic, but it still has third-party hangups. And that's not necessarily a fault of any specific controller. It's kind of one of those trade-offs of when you have an open-ended ecosystem. And then you go even further in that direction as like I use Linux on my PC. The laptop right here that's docked up right now, it's running Linux. I make all my videos and stuff, and I do all my gaming and all of my work on Linux. That open ecosystem I love. That's kind of the same deal as to why I selected the 3D printer that I made my last two videos on. Um, but the trade off is like sometimes you don't have that sort of consistency from an open-ended ecosystem because everybody can make and support something. It's going to come down to basically person to person, organization to organization, individual to individual on how well something is supported. Um, and so you don't always get that assurance that you get from something like a console manufacturer. You know that when you get an Xbox and you get an Xbox controller, those two things should talk to each other super well. You don't even have to think about it. You don't even have to ask yourself, hey, like, is it going to have all the features I need to play my Xbox game? Same thing with the DualSense controller. Is that always going to be like, is it always going to work when I turn it on? Does it wake up the console, et cetera, et cetera? You know, and you have a reasonable amount of confidence that, yeah, like when I hit the PlayStation button, it's going to wake up my PS5, right? But PC Valve is trying to create an ecosystem that kind of toes that line, both for better and for worse. So, and for the most part, like just to kind of get ahead of it, I personally think that what they're doing is like fine. So, they have the this Steam controller, especially one of the most controversial things about it is that it only really operates as a controller input device when it's running through Steam and through Steam's their Steam input API. Um, and when you're not running Steam, because that Steam input API can't really turn this thing into a controller, it runs in a sort of default mode where it acts like a mouse and a keyboard, which is not super functional if you're to play games from other marketplaces. Like if you use like the Epic Games Store, maybe GOG and or like uh like Xbox Game Pass if you're playing games through there, right? You would have to make sure Steam is running. So I honestly feel like that mouse and keyboard mode that this controller runs by on default is purely just functional to get you to open Steam with the controller if you're on Windows, right? Since this is also a Steam ecosystem thing. If you pair it to your Steam Deck, I'm guessing the future hardware platforms, the Steam Machine and the Steam Frame, those are more or less built to be functional with controller out of the box. So you're almost never going to be running in that like kind of bare bones default mode. What they called it on the Steam Deck was lizard mode. If you were ever running an operating system and Steam wasn't running, like you're not running Steam OS, you put Windows on your Steam Deck, it would go into this default mode where like one of the sticks controlled the mouse and then it let you click around and one of them would let you scroll. And that's really just so you could navigate without having to reach over for a wireless keyboard and mouse to get things going, right? Okay, I'm probably going to cut a lot of that out, or I'm going to put that later in the video because it's a little bit out of sequence as to what people are talking about with this controller, right? So, in terms of the Steam controller, it has complete feature parity with the Steam Deck. You have your dual dual trackpads here, right? You have your dual joysticks here. You have your A, B, X, Y face buttons, which um, kind of mimics the Xbox layout. It's not the Nintendo layout where the A buttons and B buttons are swapped as well as the X and the Y, right? You have, I guess, what I still call the start and select buttons, but this is probably like menu and the share buttons would be the equivalent on modern Xbox controllers. You have your Steam button in the middle. I guess if I press that, it'll turn on. Although this might need to be charged for a little bit. You have your D-pad here, which is something that I've always liked about the Steam Deck. Some people get really picky about D-pads. I think that the Steam Deck runs a great default D-pad. I don't really think I could ask for more or ask for less from that D-pad, right? You have your bumpers here, right? And you have your triggers as well. Unlike the OG Steam controller, you don't have that click at the end for those who are nostalgic about like the GameCube controllers, which had a analog depression and then a slight tactile click at the end. You don't get that, so they took that away from the original Steam controller feature set. Let's look at the back of the controller now, right? We also have our, well, this is not an input, but we have the pogo pins for the charging puck, right? As well as paddles, which are labeled R4, R5, L4, L5. That's the same thing as the Steam Deck. And something that's always been a little bit disjointed for me is the fact that you have this face button set that is the Xbox layout, right? ABXY. Um, but funnily enough, when you go into like Steam input, you get this like kind of hybrid, an Xbox layout face button with what matches up more closely to the PlayStation DualShock R1, L1, R2, L2. Whereas on the in the sort of Xbox layout, let me get the camera to focus a little bit, right? On the Xbox layout, these would be labeled bumpers. I still call them bumpers. People call them shoulder buttons as well, right? And then these triggers. So you would have right bumper, right trigger, left trigger. If I get the terms mixed up, I'm sorry. I grew up with Xbox, so that's kind of what I'm used to. You have your USB-C port in the back, just in case you don't have the charging puck, I guess, or if you want to run this in a wired mode with the device, to not have to worry about bringing a puck. I'm trying to think about like limited use cases where that would be applicable. But yeah, I think most people are going to get this puck kind of hooked up, and then they're going to not really worry about that. I'm going to switch my camera to manual focus here, and I'll just manipulate the focus manually, just so things aren't hunting for focus. This camera is not the newest or the nicest, right? But yeah, I think we could kind of move on to the actual specs, right? Just a quick rundown. These joysticks are both capacitive, which I don't remember if the Steam Deck has capacitive joysticks. I think they do, yeah. So you don't even have to actuate them. You don't have to push them in a direction for the Steam Input API to recognize that you have rested your thumb on the surface of them, right? Similarly enough, a new feature that's not found on the Steam Deck is capacitive grip sensing as well. So the Steam controller actually knows when you've rested your hands on the grips, and that could be used as an input. A lot of people online are saying, hey, it'd be really cool if I could put the controller down. I'm no longer holding it, and therefore my game will just kind of pause. So if I need to like go like yeah, my cat got into something or something, I could just put the controller down. I know the game is paused. Another example is for games where you need to open a map. You could just lift off one hand. That's usually like an action that, you don't necessarily need to have all your hands on the controls to do, things like that. So grip sense is capacitive. So that's not like a squeeze or anything like that. It's literally just, it's kind of acting like a touch screen, but on the plastic, right? If you're touching it, it'll sense it. If you're not touching it, it won't. And then also capacitive thumbsticks. So those are things that are definitely not standard. I guess to talk about things that aren't on your standard controller are the trackpads. The Steam Deck has them. Um, I thought I would be a bigger fan of utilizing trackpads for first-person shooters. There's something about the Steam Deck's ergonomics personally where I will just use the joysticks. Honestly, the Steam Deck, frankly, I don't use much of the exotic features such as the gyro, which this controller also has, is gyro aiming, which a lot of people say gives you a lot more precision in things like first-person shooters. If I'm playing a first-person shooter on my PC, I'll probably just use mouse and keyboard. I'll be completely honest, right? But that might be worth like kind of experimenting or just doing like a challenge type thing. It's like, oh, how good can I get at like Counter Strike 2 with like a controller, right? That I guess would be an ultimate test to see if a controller can really work in place of a mouse and keyboard setup, especially an extremely demanding, very fast-paced competitive shooter like Counter-Strike 2, right? Like I said, ABXY, face buttons, those are kind of the typical features you'll find in a controller. I don't think it's worth really talking about, with the exception of, I guess, the joystick technology, which plenty of people have mentioned in other YouTube videos covering the Steam controller, especially those who got like early review uh, versions of the controller. These thumbsticks use a technology called TMR or what is it? Telemagneto resistance or something like that. Um, and basically, kind of the gist of it is that these use magnet based sensing as opposed to wiping a potentiometer with like a needle. I've toyed around with like trying to construct like a flight joystick for Kerbal Space Program, and I did buy like cheap potentiometer based joysticks off of Amazon and stuff like that. And so if I could find like a video of how that mechanism works, I'll kind of show you something very similar. But what that means is you don't have any physical wear and tear on the sensing. So the part that senses and says, hey, you're pushed up halfway on this stick or you're pushed up all the way, that sort of digital readout there, that number that gets represented into how far you're pushing the stick, that's a completely magnetic sort of system. Um, does that mean that these joysticks will never break? No, because there is still a mechanical element that handles the springs, and I feel like that gets overlooked a little bit. I guess joysticks nowadays, they're just so durable that you're never really worried about the actual joystick spring failing and it getting really wobbly. A good example of that is like the N64 joystick, that like little plastic nubby thing, right? That would get super worn down, and then the stick would just get really floppy. It would just have a lot of play, so that middle zone would just have a lot of wobble, to the point where the controller could be unusable. Um, but in terms of the sensing, when you have that older technology, that potentiometer that's wiping for each axis of the stick, that is a contact on contact sort of surface, and it would literally rub against that surface, which is going to cause some sort of just literal wear and tear, which is where you get stick drift from. As that potentiometer is being wiped by that wiper and it's like kind of slowly scraping away at whatever conductive material is on it, you will start to just lose the ability to gauge the position of those potentiometers, right? So yeah, this is another really cool thing. Xbox doesn't do it. PlayStation doesn't do it. Nintendo definitely doesn't do it because they've had like a history like of being the like masters of joystick drift. Um, but this controller has these TMR joysticks that technically just won't suffer that same issue, at least not in the same way. Um, that's also the same case here for my for the Cyclone Pro 2 from GameSir. These have TMR joysticks and TMR triggers. Sorry, the camera is just not going to keep up with focus. I'm bringing too many things on screen. I am pretty sure I'm going to have to double check whether these triggers, since this is also another analog function, uses TMR based technology. Again, I don't think people really complain as much about trigger drift. Um, but yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. I'll keep this aside because there's one more thing I want to talk about with the hardware, and then I'm just gonna plug it in, and I'm straight up gonna try and play a game, right? But one thing here that, or a couple things, I guess, that some people talk about. This has a headphone jack. Um, I've never used it because the microphone that I am talking to you guys through now is the microphone I use to talk to my friends on like Discord and Mumble or whatever, or in game if we're playing a game like a like Repo where you use like the in-game voice chat for like the positional audio. So, yeah, like people said that's a bit of an omission, especially I guess if you're playing an online multiplayer game on your couch. Frankly, when I'm playing multiplayer games, like I'm usually playing Counter-Strike 2, so I'm upstairs. Like I would find it really uncomfortable or not very fitting to play a game like Counter-Strike 2 on like a couch. But for those who like are very used to console games and are using the Steam controller and stuff, or like the Steam Deck in a home theater PC type setup where they actually have their PC like working off of their living room and they're gaming on their couch, I can see a reason why you would want to have comms going through a headphone jack. That's just like something that I don't really do, so I'm just not part of that target audience, I guess. Yeah, I don't think I've ever plugged a headphone or like even just for audio, like I don't think I've ever utilized this. To be fair, I rarely ever utilize the audio, like the headphone jack on the Steam Deck either. Another thing that people said was a sort of omission, especially given this controller's $99 price point that this controller has, and I actually like the way that this is really sleek, is there's these little levers here. Let me move this controller out of the way, right? And these levers let you activate a trigger lock. Let me raise up the focus a little bit for you here, right? So you could have a hair trigger or you could have a full trigger. So imagine you're playing a driving game and you want to have throttle controls be nice and analog, right? Or you're playing a first person shooter and you actually just want the quickest response on your trigger finger, right? So this actually locks off the triggers to be a very short pull. It also actually has a tactile click. You can actually see inside of here is basically a little mouse switch that gets pulled in when you have the trigger locks on, and then that goes away in favor of a analog control when you have the trigger locks off. The people may be expected a controller this expensive, the Steam controller actually costing significantly more than this Cyclone Pro 2 to also have some of those, I guess would be considered like competitive features, frankly. You can set a short pull or a hair trigger so that the right trigger only needs to be actuated a certain amount in order to reach like 100% pulled. So that's a software feature. It just doesn't come with any tactile adjustment. You're not actually making the triggers pulls physically stop at a shorter point. You're just making sure that the software in the game will register the trigger as a full pull at a fraction of the distance, right? So yeah, like I guess let's just get this plugged in. I guess I gotta pull up OBS and start playing games as if I don't have. Yeah, it's showing the Steam controller. Oh, Steam controller puck details disconnected. So if I take this out, will it connect? Oh, maybe I should just turn it on. Huh. Let me think about that. Steam controller detected. Oh, okay. So I needed to go through the first time setup. I guess you can see this part. So let's take a look at this part together. Hopefully there's enough battery. Let's install important firmware update. Boom. Let's go through this. This is part of the unboxing experience, right? There is a notification that is popping up. We're not updating your Steam controller plug. Please keep it plugged into your PC until the update's complete. All right, sweet. Just following the instructions. Yeah, I was like, I wonder if it will just let me game. Like, if it'll just act like a controller, if Steam's already up to date. I'm running CachyOS, so it's Arch Linux based, so it should be more or less up to date. I think I updated it last night. Right now, I'm going to plug my Steam controller into my PC with a USB cable. You can unplug your puck and use that USB-C cable. Cool. I'm glad they kind of clarified that. All right, let's plug this guy in. Boop. All right, now it's going to be doing a firmware update. Updating your Steam controller. Please keep it plugged into your PC until the update is complete. All right, just let it do its thing. Steam controller puck. Now you can plug your puck back in via USB-C. The Steam controller puck is a wireless transmitter connecting your controller to your PC and is also a charging station for your controller. Glad that they're letting me know all of this. Right now I should be able to hit A to close. Now it's connected. Close. Okay, so I'm on the GPD Win Max 2, right? So it actually has a built-in, basically, style of Xbox controllers. Here is the Steam controller puck. I just keep it Steam controller. It has rumble and haptics. You can have it if you're used to the Nintendo layout and you want your games to just kind of have the A button registered here, even though most games would follow like kind of the X input Xbox layout and have the A button down here. You could flip that in Steam. I have some friends that come from more of a Nintendo Switch background, and so this might be a useful setting for them, right? We could also just test the inputs to make sure everything's working, right? So I got the A button, the X button, the Y button, the B button. I have the R1, R2, L1, L2. Oh, also grip sense is working. It went to the back of the controller, so I might as well do those. Here is the right stick. I could also click it. Here is the left stick. I could also click that as well. We have our D-pad working. Start select Steam button is working. The track pads, right? Oh, you can see my fingertips right here, as well as the quick access menu. Press A when the left haptics buzz. This is kind of interesting. They've always done vibration a little bit differently than the other controllers. It's kind of funny. These trackpads, I think when they vibrate, that's what gives you your quote unquote vibration. It's very different than like a typical Xbox or PlayStation vibration. Some people will find it like a little bit tinny and weak. I, Coming from a keyboard and mouse, which never has rumble, right? It's all fun and dandy to me. It was funny because just going through that experience right now, the left haptics and the right haptics, since the vibration is coming from basically underneath these trackpads, they're so close together in between your hands. I would actually find it very difficult to tell. It was a very, very minor difference between left and right trackpads there. Right, cool. Everything seems to be working here. I could technically calibrate it. These TMR sticks should have a really small dead zone, and that might be what they set to the default, right? So you can actually see you want your dead zone to account from just the fact that all joysticks will have just a tiny bit of floppiness. So you might be able to see on the screen here just that tiny bit of wiggle. And then once this circle turns red, that's when it actually sends input to the game. Hey, you actually want to move diagonal left or diagonal or just back, right? So we could tighten it, although it looks like it calibrated these pretty closely, right? I don't think I would actually make this dead zone any smaller or any bigger. I think it's actually set just fine. You can also see that they do a little overshoot here. So you can see even though the circle is a perfect circle here, you can see the joystick, its calibration actually brings out a little bit more of those diagonals. Um, and I think that helps with certain games where the sort of joystick output used to be like a square, so that you would hit, basically 100% on the corners as well. All right, let's look at the right joystick here. Let's test out this dead zone. It's set to the same dead zone, and you can see if I just bump the controller, right, it's still sitting within the dead zone. There's a case where when controllers start uh, drifting, that this floppiness just gets wider and wider until all of a sudden in your games, it'll actually like the joystick will be at rest, but it'll be sitting outside of the dead zone, and you'll just see your either your character just like kind of walking on their own, like say if it was stuck resting here, you would see your main character accidentally just kind of like walking a little bit because it's sensing a little slight input, right? Or on the right stick, if you're playing like a first person shooter, your aim will just slightly veer off to one side or the other, or up and down, depending on where the joystick has drifted. But while there's a little bit of play, I don't think if I were to compare it actually directly to this controller here, right? I guess I could hook this controller up and also do a test. You could even see just physically on the hand portion here, there's always a little bit of play before you start working with those springs. That's just kind of what happens when you have a mechanical device, right? Joysticks, even though the TMR sensing technology is like a magnetic device, the joystick's motion and the springs inside of it that get it to spring back in place itself is always going to be a mechanical function, right? Gyro calibration. Oh, I guess. I mean, I don't think I'd really need to mess with it, but you get all sorts of kind of functions. You could see that you could kind of rotate it in a certain way. You have up and down rotation. You have the sort of, I guess this would be more like steering wheel rotation versus a twisting rotation, right? But there's a way to calibrate this, and it's literally, I think, just set it on a flat table and let it do its thing. All right, it's gonna do its thing. Drift correction found. Perfect, right? And it's like really sensitive. You could see that those meters are like jittering even when I try and hold still. They're just really sensitive. And maybe I just don't have the most stable hand position. If I hold my hands in the air, now all of a sudden I'm not resting it on a flat surface where it could be more stable. I'm like, they really start going. So just keep that in mind. There's a smooth, fine movements which might help kind of with that. I don't know which I would prefer. I don't really know. Oh, you could also set that sort of grip detection for when you let go of the controller. Oh, I'm not holding it. I'm holding it. Maybe, I mean, I have pretty clammy hands, so I'm gonna be leaving sweat marks all over this controller, right? So that does mess with like capacitive touch sensing and stuff like that. So being able to change the range of how responsive or how far or close. I don't even think I need to be, yeah, I just need to be lightly touching it, and mainly I'm sensing it towards the back area right here. Let's see. Yeah, this area seems to be triggering that right grip sense. Actually, further over here, closer to those back buttons. So you can see as I run my finger up and down, right? You can see that. Yeah, the side, I almost think pointing to this region as the grip sensing area is a bit misleading. I mean, it makes sense that they want to put a sensor where this sort of plastic seam runs along the controller. Let me see if I can get that in focus. Yeah, you've got this plastic seam, so it'd be hard to put some sort of electronic device thing there. You know what I mean? So, yeah, getting the sensing is more along this back ridge along right here. And you can see as I run my finger up and down it that the grip sensing is being triggered. So you're actually you're actually thinking about this region right here towards the backside of the controller for grip sensing. I think I'm gonna leave things on the default. Did I accidentally change that? That looks a little bit higher than the default. I don't know if I accidentally had, or if it is kind of calibrating on its own. What's really interesting is I think the VR Knuckles controllers had its own sort of self calibrating system. It didn't let you change the sort of sensitivity of the grip sense in Steam. Okay, we've got haptics. You can make them more or less. I think it's. I'm gonna leave things at the defaults for now. All right, let's try and start up a game. Let's see what happens here. I'm gonna skip this cutscene. So we're in the game. The controller doesn't have full battery, didn't come fully charged out of the box. That's fine. One thing, since the battery does need to be charged, I'm guessing that they're gonna allow you to use the puck to just charge it and play at the same time. Yeah, that works just fine. Where I could just go left and right, up and down, and be able to play the game. Oh, just like kind of go around. At this point, this is now just a let's play. But the reason why I started with a game like Celeste is because it's a tongue-tied, precision platformer, which is something that I would tend to prefer to be on a controller first, as a way that I would want to play a game. Oh, let's go back. I was here. I know we're just in like the beginning area, so I'm just gonna make some progress where things get a little bit more things get a little more intense, I guess. This game, especially Celeste, where you want to be super deliberate about your cardinal directions, you can use the joystick or you could use the D-pad. Personally, when a game like this requires a lot of precision, and the difference between pushing the stick up, right, or diagonal is like the difference between like beating a level and not, I prefer to use the D-pad because you kind of get that little bit more precision. All right. This concludes the unboxing portion of the video, and I just want to wrap up with a more organized and distilled version of my initial thoughts. So, my initial thought that came to me as soon as I had picked up the controller out of the box was it feels like a Steam Deck. I mean, if you just compare the Steam controller to a Steam Deck, everybody has just kind of said it's the Steam Deck with the screen chopped off in the middle, and you just smash those two handles together. And that's a very fair and accurate statement in terms of what this controller feels like. So that comes with a couple of sort of sub points. The Steam Deck is made out of like the same black plastic material, and this Steam controller feels basically identical. I wouldn't be surprised if it was just the same exact manufacturing process in terms of what the plastic feels like. To some people, it feels light and cheap, and I kind of talked about how it feels toy-like, but in the way that kids' toys, at least kids' toys like back in the day, used to be made to be beat up by children. And so while it does feel toy-like, there's also a sort of reassurance in that sort of toy-like feeling. It has a sense of durability to the way that it feels like a plastic object, one that maybe you might not want to be throwing across your room, although it does have gyro, but in the sense that it is made out of materials that are kind of meant to be forgiving to sort of the environment around it. All right, let's move on. This seems a little bit counterintuitive to the first point I just made, but the Steam controller also feels like a standard controller. That could be taken in a couple ways. First off, in the sense that the Steam controller is meant to be Valve's first party offering. And by making this controller, Valve is kind of establishing a baseline of what they want in a controller for the kinds of experiences that they might be making in their own games, but as well as for the PC gaming and sort of like hybrid console ecosystem as a whole. The statement of the trackpads, the statement of the auxiliary buttons on the back, those back paddle buttons, in terms of haptics and gyro, in terms of grip sense, they're kind of trying to establish a baseline, and maybe they're going to be working with other manufacturers in the same way that they've been pushing SteamOS to be on other devices like the Lenovo gaming handhelds and stuff like that. This might be a sort of way for them to establish a standard. The term standard controller could be a bit of a negative connotation because this controller came out at a $99 price point. When taking a look at other first party offerings for controllers like the Xbox controller, the PS5 DualSense controller, the Switch 2 Pro controller, they all tend to offer their standard, base controller at less than that $99 price point. The Switch 2's Pro controller is at the $80 price point, and the Joy-Cons around that similar, so it's actually not too far off. But I feel like that could be a sort of issue going down the line, right? If you wanted to kind of buy into this ecosystem of the Steam frame and the Steam machine and the Steam Deck, every time you want to add a controller into that sort of ecosystem, you're going to have to pay a price that none of the other sort of manufacturers or like kind of first party offerings are trying to sell it as. So there's pros and cons to that, but I mean the main takeaway being this standard controller, it's also in a sense raising that standard. The standard of having gyro. That's something that's not on the default Xbox controller. The back paddles you have to pay for an Elite controller or the PlayStation equivalent, like the extra premium kind of like super fan version of those controllers. The trackpads, which I mean, if you are talking about the PC ecosystem, in which in order to get to your games on Windows, etc., you often have to control the cursor, and there's like joystick mouse controls and stuff like that, but it never feels that good. And this is sort of the best kind of compromise they can make, other than telling you that you just need to have a wireless mouse and keyboard in your home theater PC setup in order to access your games that you want to play as a more console like controller experience. So, in a sense, they are establishing a standard, but in another sense, they're kind of raising that standard. So, it just kind of comes down to your interpretation. All right. This actually leads really well into my third point, and this is going to be a bit of a two-parter. The emphasis on the Steam ecosystem, right? Steam controller, Steam frame, Steam machine, right? Steam Deck. All of these devices are now kind of being wrapped around in the Steam software as well. And some people are a little bit worried about that. And that's like totally understandable that this controller on Windows by default does not have a sort of non-Steam controller input. Like a lot of controllers, if you don't have Steam running, they basically just mimic the X input Xbox default controller. I think X input still defaults to like the Xbox 360 controller, the ABXY triggers, joysticks, right? All of that good stuff. But the Steam controller, it was said by Valve that they couldn't do that. They actually wanted the Steam controller at its sort of in non-Steam mode, which they call lizard mode, to be a mouse and keyboard emulated device. That's what your computer sees if Steam isn't running. It treats it like a USB mouse and or a USB keyboard. And that's to just utilize the trackpads to help you open Steam and get into your games. That's ultimately the rationale behind it, is you can't do that on an Xbox controller unless Windows and Microsoft updates the sort of gaming ecosystem around their software. And it seems like they are trying to do that. Ironically enough, if you are running a Steam OS machine and you're booting into that sort of Steam OS menu, you're not ever really going to need the trackpads. I think only in some instances where maybe you're browsing like Steam store pages does it make a lot more sense right now from like kind of usability perspective for you to have a cursor and a scroll wheel, because it basically the store pages for lots of games is just the same thing as the web page that renders in the Steam store, right? But SteamOS is kind of geared already from the Steam Deck on being a very joystick and button centered interface. And so that does kind of raise some questions. First of all, SteamOS is a Linux based operating system. So everything that Valve does for SteamOS always has some sort of downstream effect to the rest of the Linux ecosystem, right? And that could be like for good or for bad. We can't really tell until it happens. I think a lot of people would say right now, everything that Valve has contributed to make their products better has also been shared in a very open-ended way for the rest of the Linux community, and that's something that should be celebrated. Linux gaming has completely transformed from like a super niche, like really janky system to it's still niche, it's still a very small player base, but a growing ecosystem. And the jankiness, frankly, is still there. As someone who mainlines Linux and loves it, I'm not going to be completely just in denial or like deluded into the fact that it still has a lot of work to be done and there's tons of improvements. But on the plus side, as opposed to maybe some of the more proprietary operating systems, there is a sort of upward trend in terms of community contributions from companies like Valve and game developers starting to recognize the value in a more open-ended and community-based ecosystem like free and open source software, like Linux and like Fex. So there's still things that SteamOS needs to get better. And the second part of this is Steam input. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit less about the big picture of like what this means for SteamOS now and talk about Steam input. I love Steam input. I love what it means. I love what it does for games. I love tinkering around with it. It's not like a good experience all the time. It's interesting from like the perspective of someone who's using Linux, from someone who's used the Steam Deck, from someone who's both used like community layouts, the templates from the game developers themselves, as well as created my own custom Steam input configurations. There's actually still so much work that needs to be done with the Steam input interface to make it super seamless. And I think that's something that I'll have to get more in depth with reviewing the Steam controller in full, as opposed to this first impressions video. Frankly, the review of the Steam controller will also be a review of Steam input and the Steam ecosystem. Those things are so tied together. And that's why it's such an important part of my initial thoughts that if you're excited to watch me review the Steam controller in a full length review, which is crazy because this video is already crazy long, you're going to be hearing not just about the hardware and the buttons and the D-pad and all that stuff. You're going to be hearing me talk about how it integrates in that ecosystem and kind of the limitations and the things that get unlocked from that. Mainly, what are the limitations as soon as I try and use the Steam controller for games outside of Steam, adding non-Steam games, etc., etc. And then when I do get that stuff working and the games are built in the ecosystem or I add them in and integrate them, how smooth is that integration? Does it feel good to use? Does it feel good to tweak, right? If there's anything about the PC ecosystem that is a sort of defining trait, at least in my view, it's that the PC ecosystem is one about choice, freedom, customizability, options, and with that comes a little bit of analysis paralysis and or a lot of technical overhead, right? If you get an Xbox Series console, you kind of had to choose between two. So let's just simplify. If you get a PS5, I know there's a PS5 Pro, but let's not worry about that. You get a PlayStation 5, you get a PlayStation controller, you use the controls that are in the game. And maybe you could tweak some options in there to like invert the look of the joystick, whatever, right? But very much so, it's like a sort of funnel of choices where you don't really have to think and choose about what's different, right? That's a very consistent experience. And some people don't want to think about that. They just want to hop in their games and go, right? Whereas it's sort of an inverse funnel for Steam and the PC ecosystem. You have a million different ways to do things. You have a gazillion different third-party controllers. You don't even have to use a controller at all. You could be using VR hand stuff. You could be using a mouse and keyboard. You could be playing with a steering wheel, all of that stuff. And with all of those millions of options, that does leave the user with millions of choices to make. So that can be a pro, but if all you want to do is just have a straight line from you to your games, those decisions can get in the way, right? So I'm not going to speak too much more about it because basically that's going into the kind of review portion of the controller. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. But if there's any like thoughts you guys want to share, if there's anything that you guys want me to try out, because I know like some of you guys are on reserve or you haven't had a chance to get a hold of a Steam controller, maybe it's not even available in your region, let me know. I will try and like look at these comments and see what I can do to incorporate it in the review. No promises that I could get to everything, but there's definitely people in the audience that game with different habits than I do. Maybe your guys' choice and taste in games is different than what I'm testing with, etc. Maybe you want to see what it's like in a sort of emulated environment. You want to see what it's like with, different genres of games. Oh, how does this work with a first person shooter, precision platformer, RTS game, MOBA? I mean, I'll try and see about testing out some games that are outside of my comfort zone just to see and push the limits of this controller and then really be able to better inform you guys to say, yeah, like if XYZ, maybe this controller isn't for you, but if ABC, then I would recommend that you take a consideration into adding this controller to like kind of your roster. All right. But I'm going to wrap it up right there. Thank you guys for sticking around and I'll see you guys in the next video.